At the end of the Ice Age, about 30,000 years ago, the receding glacier left behind, among other things, the Seneca and Cayuga lakes, which it had gouged and formed out of the land. When these lakes became full, the high water of Seneca Lake flowed out of the north end of the lake and washed an outlet in the form of a stream flowing eastwardly into Cayuga Lake. This stream, known as the Seneca River, flowed over a rock formation, forming rapids at the location which is now Waterloo. In the year 1500, the Cayuga tribe of Indians established a permanent settlement here because of the fresh water, an abundant supply of fish in the stream, plenty of deer and bear in the forest, and some flat land for cultivation. The Indians named the settlement Scoia'es, meaning flowing water.
In 1792, a white man named Samuel Bear came this way looking for a place to settle. He chose this site because the Seneca River was a perfect source of water power for his grist mill. In this first year, he made friends with the Cayugas, cleared land for a settlement, and built his home before returning to Pennsylvania for the winter. The next spring, he returned to Scoia'es with 3 millers, Casper, John, and George Yost, and with his cousins, John and Ephraim Bear. With the help of the Indians, they continued working on digging races and building his mill. With crude stones, they began to grind grain into meal. It was the only grist mill within several miles. His first sale of property was to the 3 Yost brothers, who immediately built a sawmill near Bear's grist mill. The second sale was to the Kendig family in 1794 for a distillery to be built nearby. This was the beginning of the thriving village. A few log cabins were built for the families, a store was started by Bear, and others followed. He named the settlement Jefferson. Streets were laid out, much as they are found today. Samuel Bear died in 1807 at the age of 37 while working to improve his raceway. He is buried in Bear Cemetery on West River Street.
In that same year, Elijah Williams, an eminent lawyer from Hudson, New York, bought 100 acres of land on the north side of the river upon which the present village now stands. He named the growing settlement New Hudson. The Williams family furnished many of the street names. Elizabeth, Virginia, Williams, Elijah, and others perpetuate the family names of the founder. Mr. Williams was instrumental in the building of the courthouse and jail. He also gave land for a public square in front of the courthouse, variously named Waterloo Park, Academy Park, Courthouse Square, and finally Lafayette Park. The deed contained a covenant that the public square shall forever hereafter remain open for public uses. The buildings and fences thereon they will remove, and the ground thus designated as a public square shall never be sold or built upon. In 1816, a public meeting of residents of both sides of the river was held to consider adopting a common name for the village. The celebrated victory of General Wellington over Napoleon in July of the previous year was fresh in the minds of all. An old soldier with great vigor urged the adoption of the name Waterloo. The soldier prevailed, and the village has since borne that name. Until this time, the main business of the village was conducted on the south side of the river. From then on, population increased rapidly on the north side, which eventually made Williams Tract the more important part of the village. Waterloo entered upon a career of great promise. In the next 3 years, 200 buildings were erected, and it had a fair prospect of equaling Rochester or Syracuse. By 1818, the village of Waterloo was established as the county seat. Shops, dwellings, and shanties filled in from the courthouse to the mills. According to the public records of 1821, Waterloo was a village of 500 inhabitants. There were 3 flouring mills, a linseed oil mill, a fulling mill, a scythe factory, 3 sawmills, a distillery, 7 stores, 6 public houses, 3 physicians, and 6 lawyers. June 8, 1825, was one of the greatest days in the history of Waterloo. On that day, the village entertained General Marquis Lafayette, one of the greatest figures of the Revolutionary War and the close friend of George Washington. When Lafayette reached the village limits, he was greeted with band music and the noise of cannons. In 1922, the name of the public square was changed to Lafayette Park in commemoration of this visit. When the survey for the Erie Canal was made, one of the routes was surveyed through the northern portion of the village of Waterloo at about Wright Avenue. It was a great blow to Waterloo not to have this route for the canal adopted. When the railroad was proposed, the town saw the advantages and immediately backed the proposal with great enthusiasm. On Monday, July 5, 1841, the people of Waterloo awaited with great excitement the arrival of the first passenger train ever to enter Waterloo. The speed with which this train entered the town was something new. Until this time, vehicles had been horse-drawn only. Here was a new means of travel exceeding 10 miles per hour. On July 9, 1848, Mrs. Jane C. Hunt, whose husband was one of the largest landowners in the village of Waterloo, invited 4 women to her home at the eastern end of Main Street. Elizabeth Cady Stanton poured out her discontent with women's lot. She resented her husband's freedom, while she was confined to the woman's sphere to care for the children and manage the home. The decision was made to issue the call for the first Women's Rights Convention. A few days later, the women met again at the home of Mary Ann McClintock on East William Street. As they sat around the tea table, a determination was made to try to correct the laws and customs under which women suffered. This antique mahogany tea table now stands in the Smithsonian Institute in Washington. Its label includes, "On this table, in a home in Waterloo, New York, in the month of July, 1848, Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Mary Ann McClintock, Jane C. Hunt, and Martha C. Wright wrote the Declaration of Sentiments, which enumerated 18 grievances under which women felt themselves aggrieved, oppressed, and fraudulently deprived of their most sacred rights. These 5 women were largely responsible for the rights which all American women enjoy today, including the right to vote."
The national holiday known as Memorial Day, a day to pay tribute to our war dead, originated in Waterloo. After the final battle of the Civil War, Henry C. Wells, a druggist in the village of Waterloo, stated at a social gathering that while praising the living, it would be well to remember the patriotic dead by placing flowers upon their graves. In the spring of 1866, General John B. Murray, then county clerk, became enthused with Mr. Wells' idea. The first Decoration Day observance was held in Waterloo on May the 5th, 1866. All businesses in town were closed, and the village was dressed in flags at half-mast. Ladies of the village met at Towsley Hall and made wreaths and crosses for the graves of each fallen hero. War veterans and other village residents gathered and marched to the strains of martial music through the streets of the village in a parade to each of the 3 cemeteries to decorate the graves of their departed comrades. On May the 5th, 1868, the second anniversary of Decoration Day at Waterloo, General John A. Logan, Commander-in-Chief of the Grand Army of the Republic, issued his famous General Order No. 11, which officially set aside May the 30th as Decoration Day. The term Decoration Day was later changed to Memorial Day at the request of the Grand Army of the Republic. Waterloo has observed Memorial Day on May the 30th every year since its inception. On May 17, 1966, Waterloo received national recognition as the birthplace of Memorial Day.
In 1835, John H. Johnston made Seneca County noted among agriculturalists. He obtained drain tiles from Scotland to tile his farm. The experiment proved so satisfactory and so improved the growth of his crops that others adopted the method and land tiling became an American institution. In 1848, a machine was imported from England, the first of its kind in the States, by which every known variety of drain tile and pipe could be made. The first railway sleeping car was invented by Frederick H. Furness of Waterloo in 1858. Originally called the Furness couch car, the name was changed to the Pullman sleeping car when George Pullman purchased the patent from Mr. Furness. On October 27, 1885, William Emmett patented the improved rail friction clamp. This clamp eliminated the hammering down of the ends of the rails. The Waterloo Woolen Manufacturing Company was incorporated May 10, 1836, and was a major source of employment for the next 100 years. Broadcloths and cashmeres were woven for shawls that became known nationally. In 1867, about 300 operators were employed. When styles changed and shawls were no longer the fashion, attention was turned to cloth. By 1905, there were 140 looms in operation manufacturing 800,000 yards of material yearly. By 1916, they were making army blankets for the soldiers of World War I. In March of 1923, the building was taken over by the Waterloo Textile Manufacturing Company and eventually closed its doors on July 23, 1936. In an effort to save the buildings, Waterloo citizens formed Waterloo Industries Incorporated, which purchased and held the plant until 1942, when it was sold to Sales Affiliates Incorporated. This company and Evans Cosmetics moved their business to Waterloo from Hoboken, New Jersey. Millions of gas-proof ointment kits were manufactured by the two companies for war use. Every soldier is said to have carried in his kit something made in Waterloo. Zotos International operated Evans Cosmetics plant in the 1950s. W.R. Grace & Company purchased Evans in 1978, and on January 1, 1993, it was sold to Hampshire Chemical of Lexington, Massachusetts. In the late 1850s, Stillwell and Genung were manufacturing melodeon cases in a factory on Washington Street. In 1866, the factory was sold to Roth, Halloran, and Miles, and the decision was made to begin the manufacture of cabinet organs. In 1881, the business was taken over by Alexander Reed and his 22-year-old nephew, Malcolm Love. In 1889, the manufacture of the Malcolm Love piano began in the old Waterloo Yeast Company building on the east side of Church Street, the second door north of Main Street. It proved to be an instrument of high quality. On March 13, 1897, this piano factory burned. The Waterloo Organ Company then purchased the old William W. Wood site, south of the Organ Company plant on the west side of Washington Street, and there built a new 3-story frame piano manufacturing company. In 1903, the company was sold to John Becker, Chauncey L. Becker, and William C. Vaux. The name was changed to the Vaux Piano Company and continued the manufacture of the Malcolm Love piano, as well as the entirely new creation called the Vaux Changeable Pitch Piano. As many as 700 pianos a year were made and sold throughout the eastern United States. The business was sold to Wegman Piano Company in 1913. In the next decade, the sale of pianos declined sharply, and the production in Waterloo was halted. On June 28, 1928, the Waterloo Organ Company building burned to the ground. At the time of the fire, the building was owned by the Waterloo Rug Company. The building housing the piano factory was untouched by the fire, and by 1947 housed the Dwyer Auto Showroom. The building is now occupied by Moore's Furniture. The Waterloo Wagon Company was built in 1882 on the corner of Elizabeth and Church Streets. They manufactured all types of sleighs, cutters, buckboards, and surreys. Over 100 different styles of fine buggies could be purchased here. In 1919, the Waterloo Body Corporation purchased the business with the idea of greatly increasing variety and productivity. With the advent of the horseless carriage, the wagon business naturally declined, and the Waterloo Body Corporation began the manufacture of auto bodies, particularly light truck bodies. It adapted its well-known wagon bodies into automobile chassis and was among the first to manufacture automobile station wagons. In 1932, Robert Campbell took over the plant and continued the business under the name Mid-State Body Company. In the early 1950s, Mr. Tom McLaughlin purchased the lot and the buildings were torn down.
The Waterloo Hotel, which stood on the corner of Main Street and Park Place, facing Courthouse Square, was erected in 1817. It was the pride of the village in that early day. General Lafayette was entertained in this hotel in 1825. In its last days as a hotel, it was called the Madison House, just previous to its conversion to the yeast cake factory. The printing plant of the Waterloo Observer was brought into the same building in 1869. On May the 16th, 1877, it burned. In 1891, the property was purchased by Charles A. Genung. S.J. Genung and Son, undertakers and embalmers, opened its doors on this site in 1892. In 1900, he announced an improved method of arterial embalming. By 1906, the method and instruments had been patented. The system was sold by Eccles Chemical Company of Philadelphia under the name Eccles-Genung Method. Mr. Genung traveled widely, lecturing and demonstrating this new method. He had been experimenting for years on his new theory of embalming. His embalmed animals were an attraction, but his most unique specimen was George Bill Bailey. Mr. Bailey had been embalmed by Mr. Genung on March the 23rd, 1899, and for 72 years was exhibited in a perfect state of mummification. On April 15th, 1983, the business was purchased by Roderick E. Coe and became the Coe-Genung Funeral Home.
The hotel, built on the west side of Virginia Street between Main and Williams, opened in 1819. It was first named the Waterloo Coffee House, but subsequently took the name of the Eagle Hotel and Eagle Tavern. It burned in 1869 while under the ownership of Alonzo Towsley. Shortly thereafter, the Towsley House was constructed on the site. It was one of the finest hotels in western New York. In all the history of Waterloo, the blow that was felt most by the people was the loss by fire of the Towsley House on November 10, 1899. The entire fourth floor was burned off, and the north end was entirely ruined. The present building is only half the length of the original. In April 1923, the First National Bank of Waterloo purchased the Towsley House block and remodeled the corner stores into a banking house. They opened their new quarters on April 5, 1924. In 1983, the First National Bank of Waterloo was dissolved and became the St. Lawrence National Bank. In 1984, it became the Horizon Bank, and on January 1, 1992, became the Community Bank. The building on the northeast corner of Main and Virginia Streets was erected by Martin Kendig, Jr. in 1815. A private residence until 1834, it was then sold to the Seneca County Bank. In 1864, it became one of the first banks to be organized as a national bank. Until 1923, the First National Bank of Waterloo was located here. About 1924, Milton B. Sanford purchased the building. He remodeled, built an addition to the front, and operated Sanford Drugs until 1938, when Harvey McGraw bought the pharmacy and business block. The business was then named the Waterloo Pharmacy, a name which it kept until the 50s, when it closed under the ownership of John Segrist and Alan Odell. Since that time, the building has housed a photographer shop, a florist, a video rental store, and is currently the First Dragon Chinese restaurant. The Academy of Music was located on the southeast corner of Main and Virginia Streets. Having the largest hall space in town, it was a comfortable, popular place to hold large gatherings and banquets. On March 18, 1887, the world's smallest man, General Tom Thumb, entertained here. In the early morning hours of September 17, 1904, the Academy of Music block was totally destroyed by fire. In August 1907, Emmett Coons established a lunch wagon on the site. It was a popular place for the villagers, young and old, for a number of years. In 1924, ground was broken for the construction of the post office. The building was completed August 17, 1925. The north side of East Main Street was built entirely by Richard P. Hunt. The Sempner block was built in 1836, the Oddfellows block in 1854, and the Mazzoli block in 1856. In 1989, all three blocks were purchased by Vern Sessler and transformed into what we now know as the Main Street Waterloo Shop Center.
To mark the bicentennial of Waterloo, a full-size outside row carousel animal is being carved in the likeness of a black bear to commemorate Samuel Bear, Waterloo's founder. The placement of this animal on the Empire State Carousel would display Waterloo in a prominent place of cultural history. The carousel, the first to be hand-carved since the Great Depression, will be housed in Albany and will tour the state and nation. The full-size carousel animals today are carved the same way that they were 100 years ago, constructed of basswood, probably an average of 70 pieces of basswood glued together. You glue up a body core consisting of blocks stacked on end, forming the chest and the rump, and then some planks across accommodate the saddle and the upper trappings and the belly to fasten the legs on at a later time. The wood is glued together with, today, any good carpenter's yellow glue. Of yesteryear, it was rabbit skin glue. The body core is then made into a large rectangular box, and an interesting thing that I have done in the animals that I build here in this shop is I enclose time capsules in the box just prior to sealing the last piece of wood. Now, the time capsule in most of my animals have personal items that just indicate something about me and my family. The time capsule for Sam Bear has the history of Waterloo and a lot about the people of Waterloo for the past 100 years. There is a book in there that lists 100 years worth of graduates from the Waterloo High School, some trade coins of the late 1800s, early 1900s, a couple of newspaper articles about Sam Bear being carved, and some items explaining what the Empire State Carousel is. After closing the box up, you can glue the head section that has been pre-carved in most cases on the top of the box and start drawing the trappings or the decorations and saddle on the side of the box, and then begin to do your relief carving to make this become a real animal. After about 80% carving, then you can do the legs and match them in a nice flowing effect into the body, giving you a finished product. The paints are the same paints used by the masters 100 years ago. They're Japan paint pigments. And I enjoy using real gold leaf and real silver leaf. It adds an extra sparkle, and it's much more durable than the gold or silver paints. The eyes are made to sparkle and twinkle and have a little more realism by adding 24 coats of clear polyurethane. This black bear has its time period set by the 1790s American flag with the original 13 stripes and 13 stars. And then Sam Bear was a young man, 22 years old, who traveled here on horseback. He traveled rather light during his first visit to the Waterloo area. So to indicate that he traveled rather light, we have only a few personal items: a bedroll, a backpack, and a canteen. Now, Sam came here from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, down south of our saddle blanket, which shows the Finger Lakes. He came up along the shore of Seneca Lake until he got to the Seneca River outlet and proceeded east to an area called Squayays by the Cayuga Indians. This was an area of plentiful potential water power, and he saw the vision here of a industrialized village that we now know as Waterloo. Now, he and the Cayuga Indians dug the first raceway to power a grist mill in 1793. We have a wheat wreath encompassing the Waterloo Memorial emblem to indicate that he was a miller. And the emblem that we have designating the location of Waterloo between Seneca and Cayuga Lake was the emblem that was used at our bicentennial of our country and the centennial of Memorial Day. And now it will mark the place and the location within the Finger Lakes of Waterloo's bicentennial. A brass plaque will be placed on the canteen of this carousel animal to indicate to the rest of the state and the nation the pride that Waterloo has in its village and its founder in this bicentennial celebration. The brass plaque will read, "Dedicated to the memory of our founder, Samuel Bear, from the people of Waterloo," and the dates 1792, 1992.
According to the public records of 1993, Waterloo is a village of about 5,300 people. There are 2,200 dwellings, over 100 independent businesses, and 120 students in this year's graduating class. According to its residents, Waterloo is one of the nicest little villages in New York State. Waterloo. It's 200 years old, and it's still making history.